During the break, my wife administered a clay mask determined to help remove blackheads. So we've got a red residue present as we return. And before we look at the roles that hold this matrix, this pattern of energy in place, I wanted to talk about personas. And so a persona is a face of self-awareness. It's a pattern of thinking, speaking, feeling, and doing. So if you go to a party and you have a party persona, perhaps you're a cheerful person at a party. So you think these thoughts, you feel these things, you go up and approach people in this way, and this is your party persona. If you go to a funeral, perhaps you don't have a funeral persona, so you are a party person at a funeral. But if you spend enough time in going to funerals, you will develop a funeral persona. And these are largely influenced by other people, meaning if you bring your party persona to a funeral and see indignant glares and people muttering and hear on social media how you ruined the funeral, you're going to adapt. You're going to say, gosh, everyone was so miserable. I thought they needed cheering up. And people are going to say, no. In our cult, funerals are miserable affairs. So be appropriately miserable. And so okay, yeah, that's it. That's the face. See that person over there? That's what you want to be. Be appropriately miserable. Someone has just escaped the human condition. Lucky bastards, we're still here. We're miserable. So, show some respect. And you develop a funeral persona. You develop a work persona. For example, in the United States, being neutral, being attentive, being courteous in the sense of opening a door, etc., being efficient, taking the lead in a professional capacity. This is looked on as a very favorable professional persona. If someone says, how are you doing? You should say, fine, ma'am. Let's get on with the business at hand. Very efficient, very good. Every cult has its deities, and in the United States, efficiency is one of the primary deities. I get the feeling that in the United States, they would rather you competently murdered 200 million people, Hitler should be so happy, than that you incompetently manage an awkward conversation. Heaven forbid. And so we have a great hatred towards uncertainty. It's feminine. The unknown. It's feminine. Emotions. Feminine. We don't like it. We want competence, pathological levels of certainty, and we will be paid very well. I get paid incredibly well for this demeanor of competence. If, on the other hand, I get distracted by the sickness of the client's cat and take an interest in the cat, if I show an interest in the client's child, who seems to be absolutely miserable sitting through the consultation, or if, heaven forbid, I notice that my client has been crying, this is unprofessional and will be punished, because it is violating the deity of efficiency, and it's also a little bit suspect, particularly for a man, to be interested in feminine topics. Definitely something fishy going on here. And so to the degree that I would like to be well paid and considered a pillar of society, I should be pathologically single-minded on getting my work done as efficiently as possible and ignoring the the much louder calls for attention going on, just like everyone else is, because that's the kind of cult that we are. Now, in these different personas, the persona of the professional, the persona of the human being, the empathic human being who cares about other cats and things like that more than money, or the persona of, isn't that irritating? Doesn't it just get you mad when you hired someone to clean your gutters and they're asking how your cat's doing? I mean, get on with it. It's just maddening when people diverge from a narrow lineal role. When people start off a conversation promising to talk about addiction, a nice, meaty, juicy talk, get to the fucking point. What are you doing, bringing all this other stuff in? We didn't ask to hear about your childhood. We didn't ask to hear about this and this. Get to the point. Ignore the feminine. Ignore the pattern. Get to the masculine. Get to the point. Because it's not about the journey in a chauvinistic cult. It's not about the ride. It's about the shortest distance from A to B. And we see this, heaven forbid he's doing it again. We see this in the psychology of the Eurotunnel. Because as one of the great advertisers, you have to see beneath the code in order to do advertising, because you have to manipulate other people to buy things they don't want and make you lots of money, because that's what your clients are paying you for. So one of the great advertisers who gave a TED Talk explored the masculine and the feminine approach to solving a 45-minute delay. Well, a 45-minute equation. So here was one approach to eliminate it. Basically, we've got an extra 45 minutes on our hands, meaning if we do a tunnel under between Britain and France, if we build a tunnel, we can have trains traveling underground that cut the London to Paris commute by 45 minutes. So, every person, if we build this tunnel, every time they commute between Paris and London, will save 45 minutes. Okay, so what's that going to cost? Well, just to build it, not the maintenance and all that, just to build it will cost 50 billion pounds. 50 billion pounds. Let's say at the time around $70 billion. And if you take a 100-year picture of the situation and you look at how many people are going to commute from Paris to London, and you realize that this 50 billion pounds is being spent to save each of them 45 minutes of time. And then you look at the cost. How much money does it take to save a person 45 minutes over the course amortized over 100 years? And it turns out to be an insanely expensive amount, let's say $1,000 a person or something. And so you're going to try and cut this down. And the advertiser pointed out that for the same $50 billion over the next 100 years, they could have, and by the way, with a tunnel, you do have some earthquake thing. You decrease the experience. So the plan is you drive along a nice surface train, then you'd go along a nice hovercraft, looking at the views, looking at nature, having a chance to have a breather. No, we can't have that. We want you to go underground rapidly. And so what this is about is the masculine obsession with the deity of efficiency. It doesn't matter if you're enjoying it. We would rather have you have an underground experience that was miserable, that was 45 minutes shorter, pay homage to efficiency. Then we would have you have an above ground experience that was wonderful and lasted 45 minutes. Now, where this gets really absurd is when you consider the amount of wonder that could have been created for the London to Paris commuters with $50 billion. So here's basically what you do. You take $25 billion and you put it in bonds that yield interest, right? So now you're getting millions and millions. You're getting tens of millions of dollars every year of earning income, right? You take the other 25 billion and you put in infrastructure that makes the journey the most exquisite journey that anyone in the history of transportation has ever had. Forget sleeper cars, sleeper suites. You have trains, 2-bedroom trains. You build an infrastructure that is so gorgeous, it rivals the Ritz-Carlton in London. And you have afternoon tea. You hire Cirque du Soleil to give the finest circus performances in the history of the world, up and down. There is open bar. There is the finest French chefs, every cart a different 3-star Michelin chef, each paid $1 million salary each year to purvey the finest food on the planet for the London to Calais route. And here's the thing. If one was to take what was a dreary, late-as-usual British train experience into a 50 billion sustainable, because 25 billion would be paying the annuities to continue the chef's salary in perpetuity, right, and pay repairs. So you spend the 25 billion on the finest luxury accommodation imaginable. You see, now you've solved the problem in a different way, because at the end of the train ride, of the boat ride, that took exactly the same amount of time it has always taken, people would be groaning. They would be refusing to get off the train. Why should we return to the mediocrity of our normal British lives when we could stay on the train of the world? The tourists that would come in to ride on this train, the waiting lists, screw the 45 minutes, enjoying afternoon tea and a 10-course tea. The waiting lines, the Japanese would invade London to travel on the most luxurious train in history. They would be voting to slow it down. They'd tell the boat to go slower so that they could add an extra 3 hours to the most amazing ride in transportation history. But this idea in a cult that pays homage to efficiency over the sensuality, the spontaneity, the beauty, the felt experience of the feminine is never once seriously considered. The goal is to take miserable people from a miserable location and get them to another miserable location so that they can be miserable more efficiently than before. It's not to take less money, because let's be honest, with the $70 billion budget to create the Channel Tunnel and the automated trains and all that, and so now you're basically rushing under the ocean with no visual enjoyment, let alone nice wind and all that, and sparing no expense of taxes and all this to do. It's a horrific experience. But the idea that time is money and money are more important than people, and money is more important than feelings, and being efficient at making money is more important than people, their feelings, their felt experience, means that this is a no-brainer in a cult like ours. Meaning, you could stand up and in a civilized culture, in a civilized species, you would present, okay, so here are the two equations. We've got spend 70 billion pounds to cut the length of transportation from here to here, or spend half that amount of money to make the greatest tourist attraction in the world, the nicest transportational journey, the richest yacht, rebuild the Queen Victoria, the rebuild the Titanic, really get into this thing with 100 million of your 25 billion, do the thing justice, how about 500 million? How about $1 billion luxury yacht? That does this and this and this and bowling, this. Just go to. So we've got these. These are the two options on the table. So how many votes for shortening the span of misery, and how many people vote for creating a life worth living? Meaning, we're going to live life doing something or other. Let's invest our time, energy, and money in making it more livable, more beautiful, more true, more good. Let's focus on the felt experience. Like, has anyone ever taken a train ride and watched fireworks in broad daylight, created in mist? Oh, you haven't. Do you know how that feels? Well, it feels very interesting. You want to have a sample? Anyone want, oh my goodness, what about a show that changes every single year so that you watch one of the most stunning shows in history while on the train that takes an extra 2 or 3 hours, so that it's not even about Paris, it's about the ride to getting there, and that's what's feminine. The masculine is about getting there. It's all about getting laid, right? You got to get it done. Oh, done, fine. What's next? The feminine is about the journey. It's about the journey. Wow, the wonder, the presence, the amazing. Well, this is, of course, completely ignored in a chauvinistic cult, not the least by serious, prominent women who want to be taken as seriously as men. We, too, can ignore the feminine as efficiently as men can. We, too, can focus on hard currency, and it's like, of course we can't focus on feelings and beauty and fireworks and all. It's about the money, And see, the saddest thing is in this kind of dynamic is that when you have a culture that is so imbalanced towards the masculine, when people are so hungry for that which is denigrated and denied, the feminine, the spontaneity, the wonder, the beauty, the inner, the emotional, the joy, the innocent, the love. When they're so excited about this terrain, the saddest thing is that it's often profitable. I mean, Disney World is a great example of that, and Walt honored his feminine side, honored the child, which is in the ages, you have the feminine in the young child is feminine. The 20 to 40-year-old is masculine. And then as you move into the crone years, the old, the ancient, you return to the innocence of the young. So you have the very young and the very old are feminine, and then the mid-range in between is masculinity. And of course, those are the important years, when you get stuff done and you write your book and you made it happen and you achieved all those goals. And children in the old, what use are they? Just put them in kindergarten, put them in an old folks' home. The fools. They actually take time to smell the roses, the idiots. There's nothing useful for them. We have important things to do. Dad, we don't have time to talk about this. I've got a business meeting. I'm so superior now that I'm in my masculine role, trying to outdo the dad who never had time for you when you were 4. I'll show them, I'm not going to have any time for your innocence. You never had any time for mine. It's a pattern of revenge. Now, these personas, each of these personas, the persona that goes to Cirque du Soleil, it's a great persona. The persona that shows up to intimidate another company in order to, get them to participate in a hostile takeover or, whatever the shenanigan is of the cult dynamic. Very important people, of course, sitting around moving paper back and forth, ruining companies and turning bank accounts from these numbers to these numbers. These are clearly the most important people on the planet, if we're to listen to our cult. So, and this is all, this terrain is above the cult line. Now, what is shameful is that which is excluded, that which is taboo, that which is unspoken about. The pink elephants, the stuff that for some reason or other, the people that talk about this, do this, feel this, let other people see them doing things like this, they just don't seem to rise very much in the culture. I think it was Pat Schroeder cried at one point in a presidential debate because someone had insulted his wife, and this hurt him very deeply, so he cried. Of course, he wasn't presidential material after that because he had shown he had a feminine side. We don't want leaders. We don't want leaders who have feminine energy inside them. Heaven forbid. How would we, would that kind of person drop a bomb on Hiroshima even though the war was already over? Of course not. Of course not. How is someone who's crying over his wife's tears going to blow up a whole Japanese city for no reason whatsoever, other than to show that we did it. We did it. We did it. We killed all those people. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? That's the kind of president we wanted, and we've got one. So aren't we important? We value the masculine, and so that which is feminine is shamed, is lower ranking, and it's shamed the most in men because they ought to know better. They had their chance. They didn't have to be some pansy artist, little pussyfooting around. They should have done sports and they had their little archetype to fit into. So why aren't they doing their job? The fucking idiots. So men in particular are shamed, but it's just as assumed. This is the whole basis for the inferiority of women. That is subliminal in our cult. To this day in some circles, less so because women are proving that they can be more masculine than men are. They can drop a bomb on Hiroshima if given the chance. Like, will she do it? The world is waiting. And it's all about, will you be as pig-headedly masculine as a General Patton or this, that, and the other? And women are practicing and priming and raising a new generation. You too can do this. It's even to the point where, somewhat humorously, some of our new, well-feminized women are literally stunned that boys their same age are stronger than them. There's no difference between men and women, and the biological implications of even something as basic as the additional weight of breasts or the tendency to be slightly smaller or the limitations of a throwing arm. Technical scientific things. They have female Olympics for a reason. So, some of our young women are so confused. First of all, that the only thing valuable is masculine. And so since the outer is masculine, the only thing valuable, it would be a sports medal, not someone's kindness or something. Who, heaven forbid that anyone would have a Forbes 400 list for the most kind people. No. So in this dynamic, shocked that, a 16-year-old boy could wrestle or beat a 16-year-old girl. The 16-year-old girl is shocked because of this mantra of, women are the same, women are the same. They're not the same. They're not better than, and they're not less than. And biologically are predisposed to be that most horrendous of all things, feminine. More aware of the community, more empathic, more emotional, more in touch with their bodies, more in touch with the environment, more in touch with the circle, better listeners, better communicators, because it takes listening to talk intelligently, better at a whole host of things that the cult has just chopped up into bits and pieces and says, yeah, that's all, you're good at all that, but here's the problem. All of that is not very important. This is important. It's like telling a plug in an outlet, in a masculine polarity, of masculine-feminine polarity. You want electricity, you need a plug, and you need an outlet. You don't get electricity without both of them. It's called chemistry. So you're plugging a plug into an outlet to get electricity, and the cult comes along and says, excuse me, Mrs. Plug, did you know that outlets are not as valuable as plugs? Just thought you ought to know. There's no particular reason for this. It's just always been that way, and so we like to point it out to make you feel inferior. And so Mrs. Outlet, of course, decides, well, I don't want to be a plug. An outlet. I want to be a plug too. It's like I can do it. So no more plug. Now there's two outlets. There's no electricity. The outlet contained the voltage. You see, and scientists don't play into this. Battery designers do not design batteries with big positive charges and low negative charges, because the positive, the yang, the masculine is really important, and the negative, the feminine, that creates that electricity is not. You see, when you divide the world, into polarities of, in this case, masculine, feminine, yin and yang, positive and negative, they're equal. You divide the world in half and it's equal. But cults come along at different times, and there have been feminine cults that deified the feminine more than the masculine, usually quite old, in the 8,000 plus range years ago. And there have been, but also even in the recent history of the Americas. In the recent history of Americas, the discoverers of America came over, and they came across these lovely tribes and peoples in I think it was the Tahitian Isles. And you can look at this in Wade Davis's anthropological work, One River, another great book about about tribal culture, etc. The explorers, I believe it was the Spanish, coming over with their Catholic blessings and all that to discover India and discovering America and different islands along the way. They came across these beautiful cultures that were predominantly matriarchal. The woman owned the house. There was no policing. There was no violence, no addiction. Very healthy, very generous, and incredibly present feminine culture. And as such, they welcomed the guests in. They welcomed the Spanish in to their lands. And upon discovering that these people were, quote, pushovers, didn't have a whole structure of violence and this, they were just enjoying their lives, they decided that they were inferior. Anyone just enjoying their life is clearly more feminine than people having miserable lives to make a name for themselves and travel the world and put up with scurvy and rotten food and stuff to be dictated to by a captain. And, clearly we have the superior cult, right? We make our people really suffer. And we have different class systems. And the trouble, of course, with class systems is there's very few at the top and lots at the bottom. And everyone at the top just, in British culture and Spanish culture says, we're the important ones and you're here to serve us. And this is in itself the deepest form of chauvinism. The pinnacle at the top, the leader, is masculine. Everyone else is feminine. You're here to be exploited. Now, when you are an exploited subgroup, meaning you're part of the masses who is by nature at birth inferior, you look at other feminine cultures who aren't even as miserable as you are as inferior. And so the sailors, etc., looked at these lovely tribal cultures as inferior. They also discovered they had gold. And over the course of more than a decade, they butchered millions of these tribal men and women and children. They raped, they butchered, and anyone who didn't bring enough gold, the deification of money efficiently, over human beings, and certainly over the feminine. We want little gold objects. You offer us your love, you offer us your hospitality, you offer us your wisdom, and you offer us a culture that we could learn from. That's all feminine, and we could give a shit about it. Get the fuck out of our face. Oh, but you've got gold. That's masculine. That's an object. And the church, oh yes, the church wants that gold. So there's interesting letters of some of the priests writing back about the butchery and the savagery involved in extracting that gold. Is it really worth macheteing a 6-year-old boy to death because his gold quota wasn't quite good? And the Catholic, the church writes back and says, yes, it is. It's for the greater good of the church, of the chauvinistic church, of course, that has no place for women, no place for the feminine. The Holy Ghost isn't female. God isn't female. Jesus wasn't female. He certainly, it wouldn't have rung true if he'd sacrificed his only daughter. I mean, how could that mean anything? It's so at the very pinnacle of the paradigm, the Pope or the God, it's masculine, because that's the essential quality of a chauvinistic cult. That what is deified is that which is masculine, and what is shamed as second best, but we'll take it, the billionaire with his little dumb blonde. We know who's important in that picture, don't we? Because feelings, there's a little nice, but you can buy another one, right? The important thing is have the prenup, hold on to the money. And this is our cult. So in one of the most recent things, even our Native American ancestors, it's more feminine not to divide the world up into boundary, but to see it as an ecology. As the Indians said, how can you claim that which gives birth to you? How can you claim your mother? Even more, how can you cut her into pieces? As if the stream that runs through your little bit of land has nothing to do with the stream after it or before. This is a strange way of thinking to us. We are guests that emerge from the mother and return to the mother. And we show respect and gratitude. We show honor to that which gives us life. It is a strange culture that rapes and violates her, as well as looks down on any people who would honor her. Now, this is a very important part in, the general manifestation of shame and pain, because one of the things that produces pain is imbalance, extremes. Look at the human body. You can drown it in too much water. You can starve it without any water. You can pop it. If you pump air at 3,000 psi into the body, you will explode the body. Or you can keep it alive with breath, or you can kill it with no air. You can put a gallon of salt into a person and kill them in a heartbeat. You can deprive them of salt, and they're dead within a few days. Balance is the key point to life. Whenever a cult becomes too masculine or too feminine, becomes too passive or too active, becomes too high and refusing to deal with the mundane, or too mundane and refusing to deal with what is transcendent, you have trouble, you have pain. Whenever you have a driver that only looks in the rearview mirror but refuses to look forward, or only looks forward but refuses to look to the side and left, whenever you have imbalance of attention, when you have imbalance of consciousness, when you have an imbalance of value. See, that's the thing. The paradigm creates the imbalance of value. A chauvinistic paradigm is self-referential. You know, Mr. Chauvin, the first French chauvinist, Mr. Chauvin, knew that men were better than women because he knew that the things men could do were better than the things women could do, and men could do them better. And so they must be better because the things they did were better. And they were because Mr. Chauvin said they were. And he said they were because they were. And they were because he said they were. And then other people said they were too, because so did Mr. Chauvin. They became chauvinists. So now we've got a complete self-referential loop. Salt is good because it's good. It doesn't matter that you're developing blisters and this and brain chemistry and balance. It's good. Shut the fuck up, ignore the data, go with the dogma. Shut the fuck up, ignore the data, go with the dogma. There is a tension between cult, dogma, and science. There always has been. There often starts with a certain amount of science. For example, the obsession with male strength has some scientific merit in a time of raiding bands of robbers and thieves and no law. If the strongest man in the house is the one that sees the family through the next day, he deserves honor for risking his life to keep the women and children alive. Yes? Reasonable? Yes? Okay. How many times has that happened last month in your life? So what the fuck is going on when the strongest man of the day, Mr. Universe, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and there haven't been any roving raids of bandits for some hundreds of years. Instead, there's quite different problems, such as domestic violence. So if men are perpetrating a lot of the physical domestic violence, women do most of it emotionally, then maybe it's flipped. Maybe the strongest people are now the liabilities to the culture, and the most emotionally literate people, feminine, are now the greatest asset, because what we're dealing with is fragmenting relationships, leading to terror, leading to terrorism, leading then to the label of terrorists. Maybe the feminine can now lead the cult through the current terrain more effectively than the masculine. But what dictator, what self-referential power structure that has been encrusted into cult dogma ever enjoyed handing over power? So, of course, in the most, bizarre twist, if the feminine is not willing to fight as ruthlessly and brutally as the masculine for the opportunity to lead with grace, with beauty, with joy, will she be given the chance by the self-referential stupidity encrusted in the masculine dogma? It's a question. Now, every single human being has an equal level of anima and animus, of feminine and masculine, of yin and yang. Every interaction within self and without requires resourcing both of these energies. And in a cult where the feminine is denigrated, things like these feminine domains within the psyche. So if you think of the psyche as a bicycle wheel, in order for life to move, consciousness has got to move through the entire point on the wheel. Consciousness is the point where the rubber meets the road. So if this bicycle is actually moving, if evolution is occurring, this wheel is going to turn around. And as it turns around, every point on the wheel is going to meet consciousness, because the human ego is that bit that is here now. And if it stays here now and life is moving, every point in life's wheel is going to come to consciousness at some point. Now, where we get into these areas of addiction, compulsion, and consciousness control are these areas where life is moving forward and shame is about to hit the road. Shame is coming to consciousness, but we say, no, I will be shamed for feeling shame. There's no better way to kill a comedic act, for example, than for a comic to be embarrassed and lack confidence. And so audiences hate comics who show embarrassment. They hate them. And what they're wanting is total confidence and clarity. What an audience really likes is the feeling of mild superiority by a comic who is dissing them, putting them down, manipulating them. So, see, I could make you do that. I could make you do that. I've got you wrapped around my finger. This is a complete joke for me. You dumb little idiots over here, your little family dynamics. I know who you are. I'll make little fun of you. I'll make little fun of you. I'll poke that because I'm comfortable here. You're all nervous about what I'm going to say and all that because I'm in a masculine role. I've got mastery. I've got control. I can make you nervous by saying fuck a few more times. In fact, I'll make you nervous by combining baby and fuck. You see, you've gotten used to fuck because comics use it so much to make people uncomfortable, and then they laugh because they don't want to admit that they're feeling uncomfortable. That would be feminine, so they want to say, okay, you're so funny. So then I'm going to combine fuck with birth and baby and fuck with Jesus. And, and it's like, oh my gosh, where's he going to go next? I'm really uncomfortable. Let's laugh. And so let's pair discomfort and discomfort. And that's how... that's how chauvinistic I am. That's how masculine I am. I have no feeling. You think I give a shit about your deities or childbirth? Fuck it. I have no concern for your feelings. And therefore I am superior because I'm more masculine than you. So you will laugh and you'll concede that because we've all been raised in a chauvinistic cult. And so you go up in social status. A great sociopathic comic will make everyone feel mildly inferior for having feelings that the comic is manipulating. And they will be deferred to as the alpha in the mental social field because they are more sociopathic than 99% of the audience, and they're willing to demonstrate it. If you heckle them, they'll make you feel like an idiot. If you show feelings, they'll say, give me a break, take a joke. You don't want me to burn the Muslim flag? Go fuck yourself. That's what I think about you. And then, well, gosh, that's very shocking. This person's sacred religion. Fuck you. That's the person I am. Well, then that person goes on TV. Why? Because they're controversial. And controversial gets ratings. And we all know that money is more important than human beings and their feelings. And so-and-so has made money at the expense of someone else's feelings. Let's elevate them, And so we play this game. And so to the right side of each of our psyche are things like transcendence. Things that are out of control because we haven't built up the muscle. It's very similar psychologically. I mean, this muscle is, falling to pieces because I can't use it. It's very, similar to if you constantly stress one side of your body and don't lift any weights or do anything on the other side. One side of your body gets really strong. Then you'll start walking a bit funny. And then you can blame the other side for being weak and blah, blah, blah. The same thing is true emotionally. When you overdevelop the masculine and you underdevelop the feminine, you will gain social status for being very masculine, but your feminine will be somewhat deformed, somewhat out of control, somewhat less regulated, not as polished, because you're shaming, ignoring, silencing, humiliating, punishing, rather than educating, in the exact same way that we used to do with African Americans. We decided that they were to be treated like animals, and that therefore they didn't need an education and should be handcuffed and should be treated like slaves and were a threat to civilization. And so sure enough, beating them, whipping them, etc., they behaved animalistically, trying to run away. See, that's what an animal would do. Yeah, that's what anyone is reduced to when you tie them up and enslave them. And see, look how dumb they talk. Yeah, because you haven't given them an education. See, it's self-referential. They're behaving that way because they are that way. No, they're not. They're behaving that way because you've been treating them that way for 400 years. And they grew up knowing that you were capable of treating them that way because you would if you still could get away with it. Because that's what your grandparents did. And that does not inspire a sense of wonder and trust and all of that. So, if you take a whole race and decide that it is inferior and treat it that way for hundreds of years, lo and behold, it does not evolve, statistically speaking, into a race of scientific, genius, rich, billionaire, luxury, whatever. It doesn't evolve into the pinnacle of the cult because the cult is treating it like shit. And when you treat something like shit, it's no different than a plant. I'm a gardener. If you take one tree and you water it, and every time the other tree sends up a seedling, you say, get back in your place and cut it down with a machete. In 100 years, you've got a stunted mess on the one side from all your butchery, and you've got a great tree on the other. And then you look at it in the stupidity that only a cult like ours can muster and say, look at it, you see? I told you so. This is a better tree than this. Now, I've only spent the last 60 years chopping down everything, humiliating this and that, making sure that it didn't get as much water. In fact, the water that I was watering this other tree, it ran over there and they stole it. You don't, have your own water and all this stuff, segregation. This is what happens when you start off as a chauvinist, as someone who is prejudiced in a self-referential way. You grow like that or I won't give you any water. Tell a rose that, Mr. Intelligent. Tell a rose that. You grow and produce a horrific flower and I'll give you some water. If you don't grow, I won't give you any water because you're a loser. If you want to have a lot of dead roses, take that approach. If you want to have a lot of beautiful roses, you learn what a rose needs. You trust that it wants to be at its best. You put it in a great sunny environment. You give it plenty of water. You talk to it and celebrate it and enjoy it and attend to things when it gets in their way. And suddenly you have a garden of beautiful roses. And this is the terrain with the feminine psyche. Meaning every feminine persona in me is malnourished, is shamed, is ignored, is presumed dead, is presumed inferior, is not worth this cult's time. And, surprisingly, my feminine side is less developed. Parts of it are regressed. Moments of childhood trauma, etc. Parts of it are in grief that is too heavy to feel. Parts of it are numb and in black places because no one wants to look at it, and those personas feel too ashamed to come out. Part of them are in shock from the level of hatred that has been consistently leveled at them every time I try and help them make an appearance. At the level of hatred and hostility that is directed at me when I bring these parts of my feminine self out. You don't have to be female to be feminine. You don't have to be male to be masculine. The hatred is not at women. The hatred is at feminine women. And the hatred is not at men. It is at feminine men. When my first girlfriend raged and abused me, physically and psychologically, what she was seeing and hating in me was my sensitivity, was my kindness, was the fact that she felt more of her feelings around me than she did around any other person. And she hated her feminine self. Why? Because I watch her life, and all of the praise that the men and women give to her is from her masculine side. She's cool, calm, and collected. She gets praised for that. She's too busy to talk about other people's feelings, and she is praised for that. A real whippersnapper. Yeah, that's salt of the earth, that woman, you know. She is considered highly entertaining because she doesn't get stuck on feelings. She's impatient with feelings, just like the best of them, right? Men. She's impatient with feelings. She doesn't want to get bogged down with deep, intimate connection. She wants to fuck. Oh, and isn't that modern and sophisticated? To have physical sensation devoid of meaning, devoid of the feminine. Isn't that elevated? If only the tantric yogis mingling transcendent states, and bringing the divine goddess and the divine god into sacred union could only master that level of sociopathic pithiness. They would be as modern and evolved as her. She gets praise right and left, much like an adorable but dissociated female sex model. We had a great first date, lasted 5 days. She's in the sex business. And like every good person in the sex business, and usually it comes best to women who have learned this earlier than the sex trade, they know that men do not want to connect with their feelings. They want the body to perform, often in the face of great abuse. In other words, maybe they want to slap the woman, and they want the woman to say, harder. Now, this is not terribly rational. It's like, I want to hurt you, and I want you to like being hurt. I see. So you want me to enjoy feeling bad more than you want me to enjoy feeling good. Well, I thought that was a bit confusing. I thought feeling good was what happened when I felt good. And I thought feeling bad was what happened when I felt bad. That's what I thought bad meant, was that it's bad, that it's painful. Now you want to slap me and tell me I'm a slut, and you want me to tell you that's what I want to hear. I see. How much money are you going to pay me for this? Okay, $600. Beats the hell out of, filling out resumes for Walmart. I certainly don't want to have to, be some plebeian working 8 hours a day and blah, 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 blah. So fine, we'll go along. So, okay, give it to me. Well, she had learned to dissociate all of her feelings the moment sexuality was present. So we'd have these nice conversations, and I would feel close to her. And I would say, I would feel even better and more close to you if I was inside you right now. She'd say, go on, do it. I'd go inside, and she'd vanish. Bing, gone. Where are you? What do you mean, where am I? I said, I was talking to you. Where are you? Where are you? Where is the person I was talking with? Where are your feelings? How does this feel? She says, men don't like this. Men don't want my feelings. Men, I don't know where they are. So I'd stop. She'd come back. And after 5 days of trying, I could never once engage her sexually, once, and be emotionally connected. Because she had learned, in a cult like ours, that to be valuable, you've got to be wanted as a sex object. And to be wanted as a sex object, you have to have no feelings. And it was one of the most interesting things around, because I don't pick girlfriends for physical body. I never had. My first, the woman who I mentioned, verbally and abusing me, was 58 years old and plump. I liked her before she abused me because she was easy to talk to. And I thought communication is something you do 24 hours a day, to some degree or another, and sex you do, a certain number of times a week. It's communication is really where things are at if you want a great relationship. And she was, in many ways, a great communicator, except when it came to feminine terrain, because she hated her needy parts. She hated her vulnerability. She hated her feelings. She'd been to high, knew all about sex, but let's be very clear that the feminine is not welcome at the table. Now, this is a cult dogma, it's a cult wound, it's a cult shame. It is incredibly sad. There's just one problem. The feminine self is not welcome at the table. And it is the feminine self that is capable of grieving the depth of horror of what has been perpetrated upon us, upon her, upon our feminine side. It is the very thing that we have banished that is capable of feeling the grief of the banishment. And so it is self-perpetuating. What is the big deal? Asks the dissociated, numb, shamed masculine, who lacks the capacity within us to grieve for the horror that has been done. Let's take a break just to sit with that grief. Just to sit with that grief. Now, in the cycle or the circle of addictive abuse, abuse that leads to pain at levels that demands a response, a compulsion to manage the pain that leads to consciousness control, you have two faces in the roles around the circle. The first face is masculine, and this is about making something happen. This is about law, enforcing law. This is about cult and enforcing cult. But there's also the feminine role of allowing. You see, in order for reality to exist, in order for me to be standing or sitting right here, I've got to choose, as I just did, walking downstairs and sitting here. That's the masculine role. But everyone else in this culture, on this planet, has to allow it. That's the feminine role. If my neighbor decided that, come hell or high water, I was not going to be in this chair, I probably would not be. He could come in with a gun pointed at my head and say, I'm not allowing you to sit in this chair. If the police, if my government, if anyone around, if anyone at all, anywhere on the planet said, I'm not going to allow this, I'm going to make it my business to say no. In a visceral way, this event doesn't occur. Now, in a chauvinistic culture, the person that causes, that asserts, that speaks, that inserts, is viewed as the dominant causative factor. This is the person who created the reality. The people who allowed the reality, the feminine position, and we can look at this even in the sexual act, and it is helpful from time to time to actually reference core aspects of nature, even though women have a male or women have a masculine and a feminine side, and even though men have a feminine and a masculine side, in terms of the expression between male and female, in the sexual act, it is traditionally the male who inserts. Meaning, if a female, be it a dog, be it an animal, be it a fish, if the female allows copulation, just does nothing, it will occur. And so to a large extent, as females select who their mate is, as females of a variety of species, but including human, select who their mates are, who will they have children with, they are determining who will be born, what genes will propagate, by who they allow to have sex with. In other words, females are saying no more than 90% of the time. No to having sex now. No to having sex with you. No to having sex with you. No, 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 no. It's like Warren Buffett choosing a stock. Warren Buffett simply says no 99.9% of the time, and waits for certain very specific conditions and then says yes. Yes, I will invest in this. And this role of allowing is minimized. It's minimized in an unscientific way because it takes so many people to allow something. You know, people often talk about shooting Hitler. If you could go back in time and shoot Hitler, would you do it? And there's a good percentage of people that say they would. But there is an extraordinary amount of people who chose to allow Hitler. And there are an extraordinary amount of people who choose to allow Trump. And it is important to understand that role in responsibility. Responsibility simply means we have the ability to respond. We have the ability to respond. And what we do with that ability is our freedom. You have the ability to respond by any number of different ways. But your response allows, amplifies, or resists in some way what is. And this is an incredibly important thing to understand in this circle, in this cycle of pain, in this cycle of addiction. As I mentioned, I'm an addict, and that a good 60% of my life energy has gone into efforts out of fear of pain repeating itself, out of fear of pain that is in the present in regions of my psyche that overwhelm me. That a substantial amount of my energy goes to turning my attention, my ego gaze, away from pain that is too big to deal with. Away from pain that is so painful that when I go in there, I want to die. because I don't know how to get out, because I'm surrounded in a cult that is committed to willful ignorance and not dealing with it. So the odds of getting real help are low, particularly after spending $150,000 in therapy with more than 40 practitioners. Those odds aren't good. How much is it going to take? Another million of incompetent therapy before things, the suicide that I found myself before hiring Peter Sandhill as a last-ditch effort to try psychedelics as a one kind of therapy I'd never tried. That was after spending more than $150,000. And that's just the cash portion. Then you take another $150,000 of time off work. Then you take countless free hours. Whether it's the thousands of pages of journaling and writing, whether it's the thousands of hours of inner meditation, whether it's hundreds of books on personal growth, whether it's traveling around the world, whether it's this diet or that diet, whether it's vitamin supplements or crystals or healing waters or hot baths or steam baths or high workshops or sex or running or creativity, whether it's goal accomplishment or making more money. I have tried millions and millions of dollars worth of things to help heal pain to a level where being in my body is not so overwhelmingly painful that I have to rationally conclude, assessing the balance of both, that I am in way more pain than I am in well-being, and that my environment is conducive to pain, is churning it out on a daily basis. Every time someone says, "How are you?" and doesn't want to know the answer. Every time someone is afraid of the truth. Every time a woman rushes off and apologizes for having feelings, as if that's the worst sin in the world. Every time someone says they want to have a great relationship, they just don't want to invest in any of the skills, any of the time, and any of the money to make a great relationship. They just want it to happen naturally. That somehow an unnatural and dysfunctional cult is going to spit out these magical relationships despite all the data to the contrary. That this is the one area we want to maintain irrational thought, a feminine area. Oh, money is important, so we're not going to throw away money on fairy tales. We're not going to give you a loan for $1 million because you're sure it'll all work out for the best. No, money is important. Love, people, relationships, not so much. You can have little pipe dreams about that. That's fine. That's that little feminine area we'll patronize. And so, oh, isn't that sweet? You fall in love and you're going to live happily ever after. You have no plan. You have no particular resources. You're not going to study anything. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? Doomed to fail, of course. We all know that. But just let's watch them suffer as the veil of innocence falls apart with complete cultural incompetence on all sides. Let's in fact set them up to fail. Let's make sure you work a 10-hour job over here and you work a 10-hour job over here, so you're spending less biological time with each other than any other human being on the planet. You're going to spend more time with your coworkers than your own spouses. Well, that's a nice ignorance about biology. Biology imprints to the person you spend the most time with. Did you know that? It's been known for 5 billion years. It's been known for 5 billion years. You imprint on the people you spend the most time with. Well, I know what we're going to do. I'm going to have a fabulous marriage imprinting on you that I spend the least amount of time with. I'm going to spend more time with my clients, more time with this, and somehow we're going to come closer together. Now, this has never worked in the history of humankind. 500 years ago and further back, it rarely occurred at all. Affairs are a common byproduct of spending more time with other people than our spouse in a hellish situation with emotional illiteracy and psychological illiteracy and intergenerational abuse illiteracy, blah, 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 blah. We're going to somehow not say yes to a pleasurable and addictive distraction from the hell that's been set up. So let's look at the circle of pain and abuse here. So it, of course, begins with parents. And one of the most important things in a Western parent is that they are profoundly unattuned to infancy. Now, this is helped greatly by psychological literature that pretty much assumes and takes it for granted that until a child can talk, etc., unless you hurt them in some major way, they don't even know what's going on. They don't hear the TV, that doesn't imprint. No, none of that. We have no framework of understanding. Now, the deepest and most attuned framework that we have, for example, you might find it in a little sliver of the microculture with Stanislav Grof, a landscape client of mine who I worked with briefly, in his work with LSD, back when LSD was the wonder doorway into the psyche, when psychiatrists around the world were excited like nothing else about how LSD could provide a scientific window into human consciousness. And some of the work with LSD, and Stanislav Grof was a pioneer in the Soviet Union and then came to run the Maryland Institute in their studies on psychedelics before, of course, the U.S. government shut it down because Nixon was concerned about the correlation between LSD and anti-conservatism. So if you want to get elected and don't really care about your people, that's what it takes to be a sociopathic president. If you want to get elected and don't really care about your people, and you notice that there's an interesting little bottle going around, and everyone who takes it gets less conservative, and unfortunately, a little bit more liberal, well, you've got it made. I mean, it's perfectly obvious what you have to do. You have to classify it in Schedule 1, which was what one of Nixon's aides acknowledged in writing well after the fact, well after it's been shut down. But you've got to block the doorway of perception. You've got to shut it down for political, if sociopathic agendas. Now, one of the interesting things, if you'll read Stan Grof's books, is he'll talk about these prenatal journeys, where in LSD therapy, in the right therapeutic setting and context with a helpful and knowledgeable practitioner, someone can relive the birthing process in a way that helps them consciously integrate deep childhood traumas that are affecting their life, and things can clear up in the present that have been unconsciously influencing a life for decades. But of course, this is not known by parents. It is not spoken about by parents. And as a result, in the child and at what grows up, we are completely oblivious to this terrain. So there's a lack of attunement. There's also a certain numbness. When you go numb and unconscious about your own childhood and can't remember anything pre-language, you numb off your empathy for others in that same state. You forget that you're a giant to your child. In many ways, parents think that the child is the giant. Because when the child screams, oh my gosh, what am I have to do? And then what are the neighbors going to think? Oh my goodness. And the parents feel and experience that the child is the giant, whereas the infant is experiencing the parent as a true giant in a life and death situation. Are they going to survive, feel secure, feel love and belonging, self-acceptance? The child is often traumatized in ways that our cult does not have the attention span, the sensitivity, the education to recognize. A child can be going through a traumatic incident, and a parent does not know the difference between that and just being very afraid or very angry or whatever, etc. We don't discern between the two. So they are treated identically. Now, if you treat someone who needs a toe amputated the exact same way as you treat someone who needs a foot amputated, and so anyone who needs a toe amputated, you amputate the foot, or anyone who needs a foot amputated, you amputate the toe, these lack of distinctions have an enormous impact. They are a form of abuse through willful ignorance. Now, the parent is, of course, a product. We spit out emotionally illiterate parents that are affected by their own education, by their government, by their military, by their culture, and by the media. Now, you name me the number of media pieces that you've read in the last 12 months that had to do with what it's like to be pre-verbal as an infant. And I'll take a bet it's zero. I haven't seen anything in the last 12 months, and I'm scouring all kinds of media. Zero. This is one of the most formative stages in the species, and yet we know almost nothing about it psychologically. My parents didn't just come out of nowhere. My government had to not only give my grandfather PTSD, but then ignore the PTSD. Hard work to give him PTSD in World War II, and hard work to pretend that nothing's going on. So here's your dad back, little kid. By the way, he has something that we haven't bothered to examine. So he's going to beat the shit out of you so that by the time that you're a parent, you can abuse yours truly. So it's parents that are abusive, they don't come out of nowhere. They come out of traumatic, systemized routines. It has a big influence on a family system to return a grandfather with PTSD, well, my grandfather, the father of my father. It has a big impact. My father's mother was an alcoholic psychologist, smart enough to shame and diagnose all the faults of her children and herself and her husband, dissociative enough to not know how to love. It takes a culture like ours to be committed to hiding alcoholism as a taboo rather than healing it as a cultural disease. And it takes a government like ours to legalize alcohol and criminalize marijuana. One causes millions of deaths. The other's it's kind of hard to find a death attributed to marijuana. So let's criminalize that and cause deaths from absent fathers. Let's create deaths in prison, in high taxes to pay for the prison system, etc. So it takes a school that shames emotion, that shames the feminine, to create parents like mine. It takes a government, it takes a military, it takes a culture, and it takes a media that is devoid of all relevant parental information. So we also, of course, pass laws that say it's easier to have a kid in this country than it is to get a driver's license. You see, cars are important for the economy. So we can't just have people going out and banging other people's cars. Heaven help us, cars are important. So you're going to have to take a series of tests and to have a car. You have to prove that you can drive the car. Kids, on the other hand, they're 10 times more difficult to attune to understand, to parent well. You can do that without anything. No training, no psychological exams, no permits, nothing. Oh, you've had alcoholism in your family. You were abused as a child as well. You were sexually abused. You were sexually abused and beaten. I see. Well, go ahead, have a child. The odds are only 90% that your child will have trauma and PTSD by the time they're 15 years old. They're only 90%, mind. You could be lucky. Your kid could be lucky. So go ahead. Bet on an innocent child. We could give a damn in this cult because the right to abuse trumps the right of the innocent, the right of the feminine. The psyche that is in the infancy and the innocence of a child is sacrificed without thought for the right of the masculine, the 30-year-old who, I want a son to do this and this and this, and has their various agendas to lay on a child with little literacy on what it is to be an adult, let alone a healthy parent. And it's interesting, I've been dialoguing with my mother about some of this, and she is incredibly loyal to some of the most horrible parents imaginable. That's probably a little bit of an exaggeration. Her father is one of the horriblest parents imaginable. Her mother just drove me crazy as a boy, trying to actually have feelings with her, write something meaningful. I would write to my grandmother on my mother's side, and I would share, I did this, and I had these thoughts, and I wondered about this, and I did that, and and I'd write this long letter. And, a month later, I would get a reply, by snail mail, of course. Hello, Dane. Thank you for your lovely letter. Today I went shopping and bought some shoes. Your grandmother, Virginia. Didn't seem like my feelings had any impact. Didn't seem like anything that I was saying or doing was noticed or whatever. It didn't seem like we're really connecting here, so I'd write another long letter. Dear grandmother, what did you think about this? What was going on over here? Are you lonely, or do you have this, that, the other? And she would write back a month later. Hello, Dane. Thank you for your nice letter. I went out shopping in the mall and bought some shoes. Your grandmother, and it's like, nothing I say matters. I could be dead and she would have bought some shoes. It's like, that's not an emotional connection. So I know what my mother dealt with, but not to listen to my mother. Oh, her parents loved her totally, and this gets into the relabeling of unconsciousness, of abuse, of complete vacancy. And let's just call it love, because it's just a label. You can call whatever you want, particularly in a culture like ours, where part of our emotional literacy is we don't actually teach people what love is. You can call it all love. So loyal to the abuser and unconscious, because if you don't understand the cruelty that you've experienced, you can't understand the cruelty that you're doing to your children. Seemed all right to me. This seems all right too. So you have the parents, which are kind of the first part of this circle. And there's a lot of activity and impact, a lot of template forming in that arena. And that's part of the circle. That's part of where the pain comes from. I'd like to have these parents that I could connect with emotionally. Instead, I have these parents who punish me for having feelings. I'd like to have these feeling parents who took responsibility, meaning they said, gee, we're the parents. We didn't know how to treat our first child, so we're not going to have another 4 children, so that we can repeat our mistake at scale. The idea was nail it, then scale it. But we didn't nail it. It's a great book, by the way, for entrepreneurs, Nail It and Scale It, the great American capitalist dream. So we didn't. We punished the shit out of our first child, and then we said, let's do it again. Let's do it again to 4 more. So, but let's call it love. Let's call it love. And let's focus on the external. See, we're buying them organic food. So beatings and humiliations shouldn't matter. They're organic beatings and humiliations. They're in passive solar homes. These beatings aren't just ordinary beatings. These beatings are taking place in the finest passive solar homes imaginable. Aren't you lucky? You were probably just beaten in some little hovel somewhere and this and that. It's like, no, I was beaten in a fine architectural masterpiece. So in the circle, we have myself, of course, trying to make sense of all of this. It's very difficult to go into horrific pain and stuff when there's no language and when every single person around you does not want to deal with it. Why don't they want to deal with it? Because a child is the only innocent party. If I discover why I feel shame, pain, miserable, and tormenting to a point where I want to hurt my younger siblings, then the only way to discover that is how I'm externalizing the pattern that my school, my teachers, my parents are doing to me. And they don't want to look at their pattern. So they don't want me to become conscious. So, but nonetheless, I'm coming in here and I'm making choices. I made a choice to leave home at age 17 and start my own business, for example, and get away from my family. But I didn't exactly know where to go. So I'm just out of the frying pan into the fat. I'm now just in the culture. Well, we had dysfunctional feelings in my family. I'm in the business world now, where what the very definition of being professional is to not talk about anything personal. It's wonderful, isn't it? You're going to spend most of your daily hours in our culture making money, the ultimate deity, right? And it is bizarre. It's really, really bizarre because there are so much happier people living in $30 mud huts than the typical American that I meet. And the happiness is more deep and embodied. So the idea that, money is going to bring happiness and all that, and we've got to do all this. But, it's also flawed from the start because as soon as you say, okay, money is the deity, so you have to make money. That means you're going to spend more time doing money things than any other thing. You're going to go to school so you can make money. Then you're going to get a job so you can make money. Then you're going to study some more and do this and work long hours so you can make more money. It's amazing. It's like money, more money, even more money. Oh, you too can be on the Forbes 400 list of unhappy, wealthy people. Now, there's just one catch here. If you want to be a professional, don't have feelings. When someone says, how are you? Don't tell them about your miserable marriage at home. They don't want to hear that. What they want to do is pretend they'd like to hear, and a good professional says they're wonderful. How can I help you? I.e., that you're going to do something that'll hopefully make them some money. So you're going to spend most of your time lying and not having any feelings. Now, I chose the Human Awareness Institute as my primary community. I chose to do therapy. I chose to be positive. I read a book when I was, I think, 19 or 20. Was Success with a Positive Mental Attitude by Norman Vincent Peale. And that was after reading Think and Grow Rich at age 14. And, So there's all kinds of things possible with a positive mental attitude. The only trouble is there's nothing terribly positive about leaving your 4 siblings in a hellhole because you're finally able to escape, and you have no legal framework for helping them out of the dynamic. And an abuse dynamic that is psychological, most people, the biggest triumph of a psychological abuser is to convince everyone else that they are abusing, that they are the problem. And my parents were effective at this. By the time my father was done with my 4 siblings, they felt so much pity for my father because it was very clear that they had ruined his life. And they wouldn't dream of being angry at him for all this and this and this. They wouldn't dream of it. They had ruined his life. The poor guy. If only they hadn't been conceived. Well, of course they had to be conceived because he didn't wear a condom and kept doing that. But if only they had stayed in the womb, he would have been free. And he would emphasize, your mother did this, your father did this, back and forth. The children are always to blame. And so I chose to be positive. I chose to do this because this seemed like the way to grow and break out and various things like that. But this being positive has a great way of keeping the ego consciousness out of pain. It's in the past, let's move on, the great American mantras of denial and shadow avoidance. And the therapists that I chose didn't deal with the past. There was no intake form. My chiropractor is the only one. Network chiropractic. If you ever want to see a long intake form, do you have nausea? Do you have this? Do you have that? Have you ever had pollen allergies? If you want to see a long intake form, go to Network Chiropractic. But everyone else, the people dealing with mental emotional health, didn't think it was worth mentioning that parental sex habits or shame-based habits or verbal abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse, none of that seemed particularly relevant to therapy. And when none of this is defined in a culture that deliberately leaves it all out, when none of it is defined, what is sexual abuse? Do you know? What's your definition? How do you know that that's what it is? You see, I don't know. No one ever told me, this is abuse. This is abuse. Because my parents always told me how lucky I was to be abused like that. This was for my own good. It's a great book by Alice Miller. That's one of the first windows into really understanding things from a child's point of view. Now, of course, being a child, being in the feminine domain of the time continuum, this is not an important point of view. The mature point of view, those that disregard children's feelings and their lifelong traumas, is, of course, the place to focus. So my therapist didn't do intake forms. They did not highlight anything useful in the past. And, I understand the flaw in anything and always, etc. Because, of course, there is 2% here, 5% here, 3% here, 10% over here. But nothing like the kind of intake form that you'd find in a physical hospital. And high, well, as we get into, that part of the circle later on, there's no definition of sexual abuse. There's no definition of trauma. There's no definition of addiction and compulsion. There's no clarification that most of our addictions are compulsive behaviors. And so the fact that I had never taken a single drug in my life, I'd never been drunk, I didn't think I was an addict. So that gets even more confusing when you're steered off course because of the culture's focus on physicality. So, there would be times when I would know something was off. But I would also know that my therapists, or whether it was high or friends or lovers, would be mad at me if I pursued it further than I did. I remember telling one of my therapists, an interesting thing has started to happen. Every time I go to this one job site that's way out in the middle of nowhere, it's up on Mount Tam. It's a lovely 5-acre job site. It's a beautiful garden out there. But every time I go there alone, within a matter of minutes, I freeze. I don't want to breathe. I don't want to move my body. I can't get any work done because the overwhelming impulse to freeze is so strong that I have no idea why it's coming, what's going on, or what to do about it. But there's something up here because it doesn't happen anywhere else. And then a bit later, it started creeping into other job sites. And I noticed it was only when I was working alone. So it's when I'm completely alone, this sensation hits my body. When I'm trying to work, I see. Now, I told my therapist there, and like a good therapist, he says, come back next week and pay me another few $100. Keep up the good work. This is good analysis, good observations. Good observations. Bye. A complete fucking bozo. How much more literal does a client have to be to say, I'm dealing with the reptilian brainstem? I'm in freeze of the fight, flight, freeze terrain. There is a trauma at the edge of consciousness that is emerging when I'm alone and in my body. Because when I'm at home, I can be out of my body thinking about this and this. When I work, I'm in my body. And I can't feel and deal with that trauma alone. So how do I solve it when the therapist is clueless? I bring 2 people with me every time I go to that job site. So 2 people distract me from that terrain in my psyche. They also help me be less in my body because I order them about. Go do that, do this, do that. I mean, there's only so much to do. I have to have 2 people to negate the freeze dynamic. But now I don't have to get in my body because they're there and it's not a 3-person job. So I'm now wandering back between the 2 saying, you do this, now this, now this. So I'm in my head again, very comfortable, out of the traumatic terrain. And I'm now paying 2 people to do what I could do easier on my own if I was not in a traumatic state. So I'm paying thousands of dollars a year to work around the freeze dynamic that is a reflection of an unconscious trauma. And then I'm spending $24,000 a year. I had to add this all up when the IRS audited me to say this is not ordinary and it is not necessary income. I said, I don't care if it is ordinary, it is necessary. Look, IRS man, you take half of my money, yes or no? Okay, where do you think that money comes from? I'm out there earning it. Now, do you think if I'm dead or depressed or can't get out of bed, that you're going to get a lot of money from me? Who do you think makes the money in this company? Me. Now, you take half of it. You don't do anything, but you take half of it. And I need this therapy to at least have some hope that I'm making progress. So if you don't think this is necessary income, go out and make the fucking money yourself and give me half of it and I'll lay in bed immobilized. Because I need this therapy. I am the company's primary asset. Got it? No, they did not get it. This is very irregular. we are going to tax you an extra $10,000 on the $24,000 that you're spending to fix your fucking parents' screw-ups. How about that? Well, the $24,000 did not bring traumatic terrain to light. Not a single therapist caught it. Oh, they did great chakra running and energy work and blah, 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 and they cleared meridians on and off the body. 2 feet off the body, 3 feet off the 2 years old, 3 years old, higher off the body, way off the body, central, governing in central meridian. Oh, then there was this meridian up here, and don't forget the one that goes around the ear. Don't do that. Got to do that 2,000 times. But lead you into an awareness of what trauma is and how it was affected by your trauma. No, we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that. We're busy clearing, governing, and central off the body. So I picked the therapist to the best of my ability. And I settled on one, however incompetent when it came to trauma, where I could talk and listen to myself think. That's how I've learned the most of this dynamic. And, if in the ancient technology of logos, the logos was a voice that spoke, that one could engage with. Back in Grecian times, whether it was Plato or Socrates, it was not uncommon, the phenomena of the logos, a wise voice that one could hear in one's head. I see images and I see shapes. That, putting those into expression, was how the Greeks got so smart, along with Kikion, a 9-day psychedelic ritual, with soma, with an elixir that awakened the psyche to this terrain, where they could speak with and talk through the logos, the divine voice, some sense of self. And this facilitated wisdom. Well, try talking about deep feelings like this to an American on the bus, and you will quickly learn how important their texting video game is. But with therapists, I figured the best thing I could do was have a therapist who didn't interfere, who would let me schedule 2-hour sessions, and I would talk and do this. And most of the time he said something, it was incredibly irritating, because he just distracted about his own process and didn't add anything. But he would shut up. If I'd tell him to just shut up and let me talk, I could listen to myself talk for 2 hours on a bench without being alone. And I might learn something from what I said. And that was the best I could find in terms of a scientific analysis of what produced what result. Do you have any ideas? I wasn't getting leadership in an effective way that was telling me anything original. There were a few little glimmers. In $150,000 of therapy, Ann Watts asked me, what would you do if you were your best friend in this situation? And I told her, and then I did what I told her, and my webpage improved. Miniko drew Dadigan when dealing with the fact that there was this tension around clients and the fact that I like writing in the morning, and clients seemed to find it unprofessional if I arrived to do contract work in the afternoon or in the late morning. And she told me I needed to educate my clients. She said, you need to educate your clients about your lifestyle and this. So I put it in my contract. Right in my contract, it says, Dane will typically arrive between 11 and 2 p.m. This will not affect your deadline. Work will still be completed as agreed, blah, 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 blah. And this is for a variety of personal preferences. Well, that cleared it up. So great. $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 with Miniko. a nice little gem on how to educate clients about my time. But for the most part, it's just come back next week and spout off and see if you learn anything from yourself. And so I knew there was stuff here, but I didn't know where to turn. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this video and many of the others, is I empathize with the person going through this who perhaps thinks that if they spend another 6 months with this therapist, it'll all magically clear up. No, in $150,000 of therapy with 40 practitioners, doing energy work, psychic work, channeling work, herbal work, blah, 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 a whole bunch of stuff got worse. And it just reminds me of Timothy Leary's experiment, of taking 100 people who were in therapy and 100 people who were out of therapy and measuring them all at the end of the year. And a third had gotten better, a third had gotten worse, and a third were the same in both groups. And so an insignificant statistical difference between those two groups. I don't regret therapy. I just know it could have been 10 times more effective. And it pisses me off the level of passivity. The level of passivity. That I now know more than any one of my therapists about trauma, as just one example, about sexual abuse, as just another, about psychedelics, about psychedelic abuse. I now know more than any of the 40 practitioners that I've worked with in that terrain. And I'm more than happy to give it away for free, because I think that's a humane thing to do. I think that's the kind of message that gives an empathic brain the message that maybe they don't have to be a reptile. Maybe there's a few people out there that give a damn. I believe that's what investing in the future looks like. Now, therapists were part of this circle. So in this entire terrain, since childhood, I am addictive. I addictively clench my leg muscles so that I don't feel the feelings of helplessness when they relax. So certain events come up and suddenly my legs just clench. I can't access the memories. I can go to a massage and release it, and it feels great, but otherwise, until I get to a masseuse or something, I'm just clenching. That's just one of dozens upon dozens of traumatic symptoms that I've dealt with my entire life. And one of the most disappointing things, in the therapeutic paradigm, because there's also a lot of rigidity in this thing. Like the therapist doesn't like the energy worker, I might say, my legs are clenching, can you massage my legs? He's like, well, I don't really do that, I'm an energy worker. Well, who gives a fuck? Do you care about your patient? I'm not feeling anything from your fucking energy. A leg massage would be nice. Heaven forbid you actually focus on your patient as opposed to, this is what I do. So there's a failure of diagnosis. Now, Ann Watts, an unlicensed high therapist, that subsequently encouraged me to keep the sexual abuse of Peter Sandhill's secret, a nice buddy of hers, Ann Watts said she thought I had Asperger's syndrome. I looked it up. I thought it's a good conversation piece, meaning I've got tons of things that I'd like people to know when engaging with me, and Asperger's contains some of that information. So if I say I have Asperger's and I'd like to tell you about it, that works better in our culture. Our culture pathologizes things, and it's interested in pathological distinctions. Our cult is interested in pathological distinctions. So if I say I have Asperger's, and I'd like to tell you what Asperger's is, oh, that's very interesting. If I say that I'd like you to know me and understand my feelings, my sensations, and what goes on and what has what effect, people say, well, why would I want to do that? Why would the feminine in you, your felt experience, mean anything to me? Now, a pathological distinction, that's important. But me understanding your feelings? I don't get it. Why do you think your feelings are important? No one else's feelings are important. We're in a pathological cult. So there's a lack of diagnosis for the most part. I can't believe, given all that I spoke about, that not a single therapist diagnosed trauma or told me what it was or recommended a single book on trauma or addiction or helped me understand the fact that addiction is at the core consciousness control to avoid pain. The fact that I had to come up with that after 4 years of abuse, rather than be told that by a single therapist, is astounding to me. Very low levels of competence in these arenas. A lot of passivity, and one of the interesting things that, and this is where it comes in where we allow therapists to get away with this. Now, I understand why, because I've been fighting with my therapist ever since I learned all of this. If I contact a therapist like Maniko and say, look, you've blocked this, you blocked this, you didn't ignore this, you didn't ignore this, you didn't ignore this. She says, I watched the highlights of your video, happy to work with you again, right? Meaning if you've come up with some money, we'll sit down and talk, but I'm not really interested in the details of your analysis of this and that and the other. Who cares about my education? I'm just one of the many people who didn't know a goddamn thing about trauma and didn't point you on the right path, but took a lot of your money. Or my friend Steve, $90,000 for that experiment. Lots of meridians off the body cleared. Let's not negate that. But I said, Steve, I told you about this traumatic symptom. Don't you know what trauma is? And he said, no, that's not really my thing. I said, you're a healer. I came to you with clear and obvious symptoms that anyone with some basic psychological training would know about. And you knew less than a stranger in a cafe because I learned about trauma from a stranger in a cafe. He said, yeah, well, that's not really my thing. $90,000. Imagine a gutter cleaner. Imagine a gutter cleaner. You pay them $90,000 to clean the gutter. They clean the windows. They paint the house. They do this. And after $90,000, the gutters are still dirty. You go back to them. You have to find a gutter cleaner that cleans it for $150. All the gutters are clean. You say, why didn't you ever clean the fucking gutters? They say, oh, it's not really my thing. I'm just a healer. You know, I just heal things and not my thing. And the protocol, you drive to their house for an hour. Well, so many of these dynamics are environmentally based. For example, I never froze alone in my therapy office. Why? Well, for one, I wasn't alone. So what would have been really helpful is if one of my therapists had been on call. I go out to a job site, I can't move, find it hard to breathe. Hello, come to the job site now. I can't move and can't breathe. Now it's happening. Figure out what the fuck's going on. That's your job. That would have been useful. But of course, that's not what they say. We'll make an appointment, and in 2 weeks, you can come to my house. Obviously, you will have to move. If you're frozen, you won't be able to make the appointment. So it precludes dealing with the issue. So it's completely useless. Now, traumatic breaks, another thing, a rupture in the psyche where you start dissolving one of these walls and go into extraordinary amounts of pain, etc. Well, how do you fit that into 50 minutes when you don't even know what it is? I think that I deliberately avoided going into my deepest feelings in my therapist's office because I knew they would be upset if I fell apart in waves of grief that wasn't over in 50 minutes. And I knew it wasn't the kind of thing that could be wrapped up in 50 minutes. So I didn't want to go into it in the first place. And they were more than content to listen to me jabber away about lighthearted things. So why deal with the deep water? It makes the therapist comfortable, makes me comfortable, nothing gets done. Now, lovers are, of course, part of this circle of addictive and pain, etc., because what we're dealing with is parents don't want to hear about the pain. My mentors about positive mental health, they certainly don't want me to be focusing on the pain and the negative. Hi, the room of love, my therapist, they don't want to be dealing with uncomfortable stuff. My therapist would much rather be entertained by my intellect for an hour on my dime than hold a 2-year-old regressed child who's absolutely terrified of being hit by his mother. It's more fun for the therapist. They don't have to feel their own feelings. And therapists do have plenty of their own stuff that they're not dealing with. Now, lovers are also part of the terrain. I've spent time with 100 lovers, give or take. Not a single lover asked me even 1/20th of the intelligent questions that someone knowledgeable with this terrain would ask, nor did they volunteer 1/20th of the information about the same diseases and stuff that they're dealing with. 100% of the women that I have dated in Denmark, in Thailand, in the Philippines, in Italy, and in the US, 100% have demonstrated traumatic illiteracy. Meaning if they expressed traumatic symptoms, they had no idea how to communicate what was going on or what I should do about it. And if I communicated traumatic symptoms, they had no idea what to do about it. I had no idea what to do about it other than to point out the phenomena. I remember there was a high intern that I was dating, and I said, look, you're behaving so compulsively and so strangely in this terrain that I want to know what's going on. Her eyes are darting back and forth. Nothing's going on, nothing's going on. I said, that's exactly what I mean. You look at me like you are a caged animal. I've never raised my voice to you. I've never hurt you. But when you look out, you are seeing something so frightening, I can't even imagine what it is. No, nothing. So it's so frightening you can't even admit that it's going on. No, it's not going on. Nothing's going on. Nothing's going on. It's like, what do I do with this? I have no clue. You think my therapist helped me with this? No. Another story, they say, well, you know people. Gosh, people these days. Oh, it's completely pathetic. A total traumatic reaction with no information about what trauma is. So I left. I said, I don't feel safe. If you're going to go into panics, 1, 2, not tell me what's going on, and 3, lie to my face while demonstrating the most bizarre behavior and say that nothing is going on. I'm scared shitless because the amount of panic in your face and the commitment with which you are suppressing it is the kind of stuff like if there's a nuclear holocaust around the corner, it's that kind of panic. But I don't know what you're afraid of.